Iraq's President Hussein blinks but remains an irritant in the eyes of the United Nations.
And catastrophic famine in Somalia, the suffering and death that won't go away. Welcome to our viewers around the world. This is World Day. I'm Bobbie Battista.
And I'm Reid Collins. Well, the stare down, if it is, between the United Nations and Iraq's Saddam Hussein is over for the moment. But when a UN inspection team enters the Agriculture Ministry in Baghdad tomorrow, searching for documentation of Iraq's missile program, that building will have had 3 weeks in which to be sanitized of all incriminating evidence. CNN's Brent Sadler is in Baghdad.
When the doors to this building, Iraq's Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation, swing open, it's doubtful the inspectors will find what they originally thought was there. The complex has been unobserved for almost a week. The United Nations Special Commission believes it was time enough for an effective clean-out of any incriminating evidence. By orchestrating civilian hostility towards the UN inspection team, Baghdad created an international crisis. It was the most serious confrontation between Iraq and the United States since the Gulf War ceasefire. The previous UN inspection team was effectively locked out of the ministry and pressured to leave by government-backed street protests. The old team was headed by an American, but when it returns, a German will be in charge. The key to ending the war of words was the nationalities of those original inspectors. Baghdad objected to experts whose government participated in the US-led coalition that drove Baghdad's troops from Kuwait. So why did Saddam Hussein resist the inspection almost to the point of conflict? Perhaps he had secrets to hide, although that is strenuously rejected by officials in Baghdad. More importantly for Iraq, they say, it became a matter of principle. Trade sanctions are hurting badly, not the leadership, but ordinary Iraqis. Shops and markets are full of food, much of it imported through Jordan, all of it too expensive for ordinary citizens. There are no signs of any official let-up of the embargo, which is crippling the economy. Saddam Hussein was last seen awarding medals to his ruling elite. He expected the sanctions to be eased if he complied with the UN weapons inspection process. But in the regime's view, the more they yield to UN pressure, the more America and its allies want without rewarding Iraq. The latest standoff may be over, but with Iraq's president defying other UN demands, the source of further conflict remains the same. When the weapons team arrives in the capital Tuesday, their inspection of the Agricultural Ministry here will be turned into something of a largely symbolic event. But people aren't talking so much about that as Saddam Hussein's crackdown on merchants, hiking up food costs in case of war. Some prices doubled in 24 hours. A number of traders were apparently arrested and publicly displayed, tied to lampposts as punishment, a crime that seems to be now carrying an implicit threat of the death sentence. Brent Sadler, CNN, Baghdad.
Now, Brent Sadler has just returned to our broadcast position from a visit to the Agriculture Ministry in Baghdad and joins us live. Brent, what are conditions over there now?
Well, it's all very calm. The Agricultural Ministry is, in fact, still a no-go area for Iraqi traffic. There are a couple of Iraqi guards sitting rather lazily on 2 chairs on the corners of the complex, sitting in the sun, preventing pedestrians from going anywhere near the building, and it's roped off with very large and long pieces of string. There are still a couple of posters decrying the American involvement in all this hanging on the ministry building. That's it from there at the moment.
Is this seen as largely an Iraq-United States struggle?
Yes, indeed. It's seen throughout all the newspapers here that the behavior of the United Nations is indeed orchestrated by Washington. But the Baghdad Observer, I note this morning on its front page, says that both Iraq and the United Nations reach an inspection accord. In other words, the Iraqis do not seem to be claiming any sort of diplomatic victory here. It seems to be an even score draw, you might say, during this latest confrontation.
All right, Brent Sadler reporting live from Baghdad, and the inspection is scheduled to start, as he says, on Tuesday. France says the crisis was ended when Iraq said that those inspectors, if they weren't members of the alliance, could enter the agriculture ministry. But President Bush is intending to keep the pressures on Iraq to honor the other agreements, such as the end to harassment of the Kurds and the Shiites, and a return of those taken prisoner during Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The president's firmness was evident yesterday.
Once again, Saddam Hussein has caved in, and while Saddam has bent to the will of the UN, the question remains whether after this delay a truly effective inspection of the ministry is still possible. The real test of his behavior will be in future UN inspections. Behavior along the lines we've just witnessed will not be tolerated.
Presidential Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater said this morning that all the major players in the coalition against Iraq, including the Arab allies, support the need for Iraq to abide by the ceasefire that they signed.
In the States, the presses are rolling again in Pittsburgh, but the 6-week newspaper strike is not over. Angry strikers gathered outside the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette to protest the resumption of publishing today. Non-union drivers are delivering the first edition since May 17th. Police began arresting demonstrators this morning. Strikers are upset with company plans to streamline delivery and eliminate about 450 jobs.
A spokeswoman for Ronald Reagan says a report that the former president now is a target in the Iran-Contra investigation is false and unfounded. The spokeswoman says Mr. Reagan has received assurances that he is not a target, assurances from the independent counsel, Lawrence Walsh himself. This is in contrast to a Washington Post report yesterday that Walsh was deciding whether to seek an indictment against Mr. Reagan and several of his close advisors. The alleged conspiracy to cover up a 1985 arms for hostages deal is cited in this published report. The Reagan statement says there is no evidence that President Reagan has violated any law or has been anything less than completely forthcoming. He has cooperated fully, voluntarily, and honestly with all aspects of the Iran-Contra investigations, and any suggestion to the contrary is false. Man once in charge of all the overseas spying for the CIA, Claire George, is in the midst of his own Iran-Contra trial in Washington now. Today, a former CIA official, Alan Fires, is expected to testify that George had tried to hide from Congress his knowledge of that operation.
Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party is favoring a win today at the polls. Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa led the cheering after results of yesterday's election came in. His Liberal Democratic Party took 69 of 127 seats contested for Parliament's upper house, a gain, but not